Now it is my privilege to invite Cailin Crockett, Senior Advisor to the White House Gender Policy Council, where she leads initiatives on technology-facilitated gender-based violence, and a Director for Defense Policy and the National Security Council, focused on implementation of military justice reform, conflict-related sexual violence, and gender equity in the military. Cailin has worked to advance national and global policies for the prevention and response of gender-based violence across the lifespan, and we are excited to have her join us today. Welcome, Cailin.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and welcome everyone. Thank you to Valor US, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, and the National Sexual Violence Resource Center for hosting this year's National Sexual Assault Conference. I also want to thank all of you in the room. I'm incredibly delighted that this event brings together so many vital allies in our work to prevent and end gender-based violence, and particularly sexual violence. And I recognize the gravity of this particular convening, being the first in-person gathering since the lockdown period of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm so grateful to all of you who do this hard, critical work to support survivors and to build a world where every person may live free from sexual violence. Even as we did this work, you did this work amidst a global public health emergency that presented unique and dangerous challenges, not only for survivors, but to each of you working on the front lines. As Sandra mentioned, I do a lot of work on sexual violence in the military, and so it's really fantastic to see so many victim advocates from the military in the room today, and really looking forward to connecting with you, attending your presentations. As this group knows extremely well, preventing and addressing gender-based violence is a lifelong commitment for both President Biden and Vice President Harris. And you all know so well that the costs and consequences of gender-based violence and sexual violence in particular impact not only individual survivors, families, communities, but our nation and our world. And that the ripple effects of gender-based violence and just one act of sexual assault or abuse are felt also across our economy and truly impact communities nationally, globally, and locally. And that women and girls from historically marginalized communities, people of color, indigenous communities, LGBTQI people, gender nonconforming individuals, people with disabilities, older adults, and many others are disproportionately impacted. And of course, we know too that men and boys also experience gender-based violence, including sexual violence and other forms of abuse. And this is why the Biden-Harris administration has made ending gender-based violence one of the cornerstones of our approach to advancing gender equity and equality in both our domestic and foreign policy. In the executive order that the president signed in March of his first year in office establishing the White House Gender Policy Council, the president called on us to develop the first ever national plan to end gender-based violence, recognizing that supporting survivors and promoting prevention is not limited to just one or even a few federal agencies. Indeed, as the president has long said, it takes all of us working together across sectors, across all levels of government, if we are to effectively tackle this scourge. And so it is with this lens that more than a dozen federal agencies, including many of my dear colleagues, mentors, and friends in the room today, who you will be hearing from later, came together to develop the national plan, which takes an intersectional, interdisciplinary approach to preventing and responding to gender-based violence throughout the life course. The plan places an unprecedented focus on prevention and also tackles new and emerging forms of gender-based violence, like technology-facilitated gender-based violence, including image-based sexual abuse. And I have to say, I really commend the organizers today for the really thoughtful comment on photography and opting in and providing people with an option there. It was incredibly trauma-informed, and I think just an important ongoing practice for our field to take. I hope that you'll join us for tomorrow's listening session to learn more about the plan and most importantly, for us to hear from you and to get your feedback on how you're receiving the plan and how you might use it as a tool to affect change in your communities. So I also just want to lastly note it's particularly meaningful to be able to join you here today, just weeks after the President signed the executive order to implement historic bipartisan military justice reforms that will significantly strengthen how the military handles sexual assault cases, but also domestic violence cases, child abuse cases, murder, and other connected felony-level crimes. The executive order transfers key decision-making authorities from commanders to specialized, independent military prosecutors who will continue to be trained and specialized and do that ongoing work of taking in these complex cases. These changes implement reforms passed by Congress in the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, and they are a turning point for survivors of gender-based violence in the military. I want to thank each and every one of you. So many of you in this room have been critical, working decades to pass these reforms. So in closing, I just want to thank all of you for being here today, who have dedicated your lives to speaking out, standing courageously with survivors, and working to change the culture that has allowed sexual violence to exist for far too long. The work you do is critical. It's often thankless, but I just want to tell you how much myself and the Biden-Harris administration appreciates what you do, and we stand beside you and humbly learn from you. Thank you.